The lone gunshot echoed through the Montana twilight, startling a flock of birds from their perches as Sheriff Samuel Yates holstered his smoking pistol, his weathered face set like stone beneath the brim of his Stetson. The year was 1878, and the small frontier town of Whispering Creek had seen its share of outlaws and hardships. But nothing had prepared Sam for the responsibility that awaited him inside the abandoned homestead he'd been tracking toward for 3 days. "Stay down," he commanded the trembling young man beside him, a horse thief who'd led him on this chase into the foothills. The outlaw's accomplices had scattered like jackrabbits at the first sight of the sheriff's badge, all except this one who'd been too slow to escape Sam's expert aim. The bullet had only grazed his leg, a warning shot that said the sheriff wanted him alive. "Please," the young man whimpered, clutching his bloodied thigh. "I ain't worth dragging back, not with night coming on and the storm brewing." Sam's steel-blue eyes scanned the darkening horizon where thunderheads gathered above the mountain ridge. The wind carried the scent of rain, promising a downpour before midnight. He'd been about to make camp when he'd spotted smoke rising from the chimney of this supposedly abandoned cabin, a place that had been empty since the Nelson family had been killed by raiders last winter. "Someone's in there," Sam muttered, more to himself than his prisoner. "Stay put or the next bullet won't be so friendly." He secured the young man to a nearby tree with a length of rope, then approached the cabin cautiously, his hand resting on the walnut grip of his Colt. The cabin door creaked as Sam pushed it open with the barrel of his gun, revealing a scene that stopped him cold. A young woman sat beside a small fire in the hearth, her honey-blonde hair falling in waves around a face smudged with dirt and etched with exhaustion. But it was what she cradled in her arms that made Sam lower his weapon, 2 tiny infants, both red-faced and wailing with the particular desperation of the very young and very hungry. "Madam," Sam said, removing his hat as he stepped inside, revealing thick dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. "Sheriff Samuel Yates." "I don't mean to intrude, but this property, I know it's not mine," she interrupted, her voice soft but determined despite the circles beneath her hazel eyes. "We just needed shelter from the storm. Please, I'll move on tomorrow." One of the babies let out a particularly piercing cry, and the woman rocked them desperately, looking as though she might collapse from sheer exhaustion. "What's your name?" Sam asked, holstering his weapon completely. "Nora." "Nora Patterson," she answered, attempting to adjust both squirming infants. "And these are Henry and Hannah." "Your children," a shadow crossed her face. "My sister's she died 3 days ago, childbirth fever." Nora swallowed hard. "Their father was killed in a mining accident before they were born. I'm all they have now." Sam glanced back at the open door, thinking of the storm approaching and the injured outlaw tied to a tree. He'd been planning to make the 2-day journey back to town with his prisoner at first light. Now he wasn't sure what to do. "They won't stop crying," Nora whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I've tried everything. They're hungry and I don't know what to do." Before Sam could respond, a flash of lightning illuminated the small cabin, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The first heavy raindrops began to pelt the roof. "My prisoner," Sam muttered, striding to the door. 20 minutes later, he returned soaked to the skin, dragging the sullen horse thief behind him. The young man's leg had been hastily bandaged with a strip of cloth torn from Sam's own shirt. "You'll stay right there," Sam ordered, securing him to a chair in the corner of the one-room cabin. The outlaw, who'd reluctantly identified himself as Jed Tucker, nodded miserably, too wet and defeated to argue. The twins were still crying, their tiny faces scrunched in distress. Nora looked about ready to join them, her composure beginning to crack. "When did they eat last?" Sam asked, removing his sodden coat and hanging it by the door. "I've been giving them sugar water," Nora admitted. "It's all I have. We lost the mare that was pulling our wagon yesterday, snakebite. I took what I could carry and started walking." Sam ran a hand through his damp hair. There's a settlement about 15 miles west of here. They might have a wet nurse. 15 miles, Nora repeated, looking down at the infants. I don't think they'll make it that far without proper feeding. The cabin fell silent except for the baby's cries and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. Sam moved to his saddlebag and pulled out a tin of condensed milk. My mother raised my youngest sister on this when her milk dried up, he explained, moving to the hearth. It's not perfect, but it might help until we can find something better. As Sam worked to prepare the milk, diluting it with water and warming it carefully over the fire, he glanced at Nora. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with a delicate beauty that persisted despite her obvious fatigue. There was a strength in her eyes, too, the kind that came from facing down hardship and refusing to surrender. Where were you headed? He asked. Silver Springs, she replied, gently bouncing the twins. My aunt lives there. She said she'd take us in. Sam nodded. He knew Silver Springs, a growing town about 50 miles northeast of Whispering Creek. That's quite a journey with 2 newborns. I had no choice, Nora said simply. There was nothing left for us back in Copper Canyon after Margaret died. When the milk was ready, Sam offered the makeshift bottle a cleaned whiskey flask with a strip of cloth tied around the mouth. Nora looked at it dubiously. It'll work, Sam assured her, at least for tonight. She took it gratefully, offering it first to Hannah, whose crying subsided almost immediately as she drank. Henry, however, continued to wail, his tiny fists balled in protest. May I? Sam asked, surprising himself with the offer. Nora hesitated only briefly before handing Henry to him. The sheriff cradled the infant awkwardly at first, then settled him in the crook of his arm. He prepared a second bottle and offered it to the baby boy, who eventually accepted it, his cries diminishing to hiccuping sobs. From his corner, Jed watched with thinly disguised interest. Didn't figure you for the fatherly type, Sheriff. Sam shot him a warning glance. I was the oldest of 6, had to help with the little ones. As the storm raged outside, the unlikely group settled into an uneasy truce. When both babies had been fed, they remained fussy and uncomfortable, squirming in Nora's arms as she tried to soothe them. They need changing, she said, her cheeks flushing slightly. She glanced around the small cabin, clearly uncomfortable with the lack of privacy. I'll step outside, Sam offered. In this weather, Nora shook her head. Just turn around, both of you. Sam obliged, facing the wall while Nora tended to the twins. When she had finished, the babies were still restless, overtired and overstimulated by the unfamiliar surroundings and the constant thunder. They won't settle, Nora said, the desperation creeping back into her voice. They need to sleep, but they just won't. Sing to them, Sam suggested quietly. What? My mother always sang to us when we couldn't sleep. Even my father, tough as rawhide though he was, would sing sometimes. A faint smile crossed his face at the memory. Said it was the only thing that could quiet a troubled spirit. Nora looked doubtful, but as Hannah began to cry again, she took a deep breath and began to sing softly. Her voice was sweet and clear, rising and falling like a gentle stream as she sang a lullaby about meadows and starlight. To everyone's surprise, the twins' cries began to subside. Their eyelids grew heavy as Nora continued to sing, her voice gaining confidence. Sam found himself transfixed, watching as the firelight cast a golden glow on her face. Even Jed had fallen silent, his head drooping toward his chest as the melody filled the small cabin. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, a different kind of peace descended. By the time Nora's song ended, both twins were asleep, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect unison. You have a beautiful voice, Sam said quietly. Nora blushed slightly. Thank you. My father was always singing. Said music was God's way of reminding us that beauty exists even in the hardest times. Her expression grew wistful. I haven't sung since he passed last year. I'm glad you remembered how, Sam replied, his voice unusually gentle for a man who spent most of his days tracking outlaws and keeping the peace in a lawless territory. As Nora carefully laid the sleeping infants on a makeshift bed of blankets, Sam checked on his prisoner, who had indeed dozed off despite his uncomfortable position. The sheriff secured his bonds once more before turning his attention back to Nora. "You should get some rest," he suggested. "I'll keep watch." "I can't ask you to do that," she protested. "You didn't ask, I offered." Sam gestured toward the small bed in the corner. "Take it, I'm used to sleeping rough." Nora hesitated, then nodded gratefully. "Wake me when they stir, they'll be hungry again before morning." "I will," Sam promised, settling himself in a chair with a clear view of both the door and his prisoner. As Nora slept, Sam found his gaze drawn repeatedly to her face, softened in sleep, and to the twins nestled nearby. It had been a long time since he'd allowed himself to think about a family of his own. At 35, he'd resigned himself to a solitary life, married to his badge and the responsibilities that came with it. The loss of his fiancée, Elizabeth, to consumption 7 years earlier, had left a wound that never quite healed. Yet something about Nora Patterson and these orphaned infants stirred feelings he'd thought long buried. Perhaps it was her courage, setting out alone with 2 newborns in search of safety. Or maybe it was simply the way she had sung, her voice cutting through the storm like a beacon of hope. Sam shook his head, dismissing such thoughts as foolishness. Come morning, he would escort them to the nearest settlement, ensure they had supplies and perhaps arrange for transportation to Silver Springs. Then he would return to Whispering Creek with his prisoner, and life would continue as before. But as the night deepened and the storm gradually subsided, leaving only the soft patter of rain on the roof, Sam Yates couldn't quite convince himself that anything would ever be quite the same again. Dawn broke with tentative fingers of light reaching through the cabin's single window. Sam had dozed fitfully, waking at every sound, the settling of logs in the fireplace, Jed shifting uncomfortably in his bonds, the occasional whimpers from the twins. Twice during the night, he'd roused Nora when the babies grew hungry, watching as she fed them with the improvised bottles, her movements growing more confident each time. Now, as pale sunlight illuminated the cabin, Sam assessed their situation. The storm had passed, but the ground would be muddy, making travel difficult. Jed needed medical attention for his leg, which showed early signs of infection, and the twins required more suitable nourishment than condensed milk could provide. "We need to reach that settlement I mentioned," Sam said as Nora stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "If we leave within the hour, we can make it by midday." Nora sat up, immediately checking on the twins who were, remarkably, still sleeping. "On foot, with the babies." "I have my horse," Sam replied. "You can ride with the twins, I'll walk alongside and lead Jed." She brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You do that for strangers." "It's my job to help folks in need," Sam said, though they both knew his duty extended primarily to enforcing the law, not escorting young women and infants across the territory. Before Nora could respond, Henry began to fuss, his tiny face scrunching up in preparation for a full-throated cry. Quickly, she scooped him up, but his wails soon woke Hannah, and both babies began crying in earnest. "They need changing again," Nora said, her moment of rest clearly over. "And feeding." Sam nodded, turning to check on his prisoner while Nora tended to the twins. Jed was awake, his face pale and sweaty from the pain in his leg. "How bad is it?" Sam asked, examining the wound. "Bad enough," Jed grimaced. "But I reckon I can make it to wherever you're taking us if that's what you're asking." "Good. Because I'm not leaving you here, and I'm not delaying for your comfort." Sam's tone was firm but not unkind. He'd seen enough men die from infected wounds to know Jed's situation was serious, but not yet desperate. While Nora fed the twins, Sam prepared a simple breakfast from his provisions hardtack softened in hot water, dried beef, and the last of his coffee. They ate quickly, sharing the meager meal without complaint. As they prepared to leave, Sam organized their belongings efficiently. Nora had surprisingly few possessions, just a small bundle of clothes, a locket containing a tintype of her sister, and a worn Bible. The twins had even less a few scraps of cloth serving as diapers and the blankets they were wrapped in. "You left in a hurry," Sam observed as he helped her secure the infants in a sling fashioned from a shawl. Nora's eyes darkened. "Margaret died so suddenly, the fever took her within days of the births. The doctor said. She swallowed hard. He said the babies might be better off in an orphanage. That I couldn't possibly manage them alone, but I couldn't bear to separate them or leave them with strangers." Sam nodded, understanding her determination. "My mother was widowed young, raised 6 children on her own. If she could do it, I reckon you can too." The simple vote of confidence brought a flush to Nora's cheeks. "Thank you, Sheriff." "Sam," he corrected her. "Out here titles don't mean much." With Nora and the twins settled on Sam's sturdy buckskin gelding, and Jed stumbling along with his hands bound before him, they set out toward the settlement of Riverford. The going was slow, the ground muddy and treacherous in places where the storm had carved new gullies into the landscape. The twins, exhausted from their night of intermittent crying, slept surprisingly well, nestled against Nora's chest in the makeshift sling. When they did wake, fussing with hunger or discomfort, Sam would call for a halt, helping Nora down from the horse and standing guard while she tended to them. During one such stop, as Nora changed Hannah while Sam held Henry, the sheriff found himself studying the baby boy's face. The infant had a shock of dark hair and eyes that, while still the unfocused blue of newborns, seemed to hold a certain awareness as they gazed up at him. "He looks like you," Sam remarked, surprised by the observation. Nora glanced up from her task. "Margaret's husband had dark hair too. The midwife said they both favor him." A shadow crossed her face. "At least they'll have that connection to him, even if they'll never know him." "What was he like, their father?" "Thomas was kind, hardworking. He and Margaret were devoted to each other." Nora finished changing Hannah and reached for Henry. "He was so excited about the babies, had already built a cradle big enough for both of them." Her voice caught. "He died in a mine collapse 3 months before they were born. Margaret was never the same after that." Sam handed Henry to her, their fingers brushing momentarily. "I'm sorry for your losses." "Thank you." Nora smiled sadly as she settled both twins back into the sling. "What about you?" "Do you have family?" "Not anymore," Sam replied, helping her back onto the horse. "My parents are gone. My sisters are scattered, 2 in California, 1 in Denver, 2 back east. We write, but I haven't seen them in years." "That must be lonely." Sam shrugged, his expression revealing little. "The job keeps me busy." From where he sat resting on a fallen log, Jed let out a snort. "The job? You mean chasing down poor fools like me who are just trying to survive?" "I mean upholding the law," Sam retorted, hauling the outlaw to his feet. "Which includes preventing horse thieves from stealing what honest folks have worked for." "Easy to judge when you've got a badge and a regular meal," Jed muttered, but he fell silent under Sam's stern gaze. They continued their journey, the sun climbing higher in the sky, burning away the last traces of the storm. By midday, they spotted the settlement in the distance, a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley between rolling hills. Riverford was barely more than an outpost, a general store, a smithy, a small church, and a dozen or so cabins scattered along a dirt road. But to the weary travelers it looked like salvation. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Children playing in the muddy street stopped to stare, and several men emerged from the general store, hands instinctively moving toward weapons until they recognized the star pinned to Sam's vest. "Sheriff Yates," one of them called, a burly man with a thick beard. "Long way from Whispering Creek." "Got myself an outlaw," Sam replied, nodding toward Jed. "And some folks who need assistance." The man who introduced himself as Hiram Wells, the de facto leader of the settlement, surveyed the group with interest. His gaze lingered on Nora and the infants, his expression softening. "The doc's here," he said. "Visiting from Fort Collins. He can look at your prisoner's leg, and we've got a room at the boarding house for the lady and her little ones." "They're not mine," Nora clarified quickly. They're my sisters, she, passed recently. Hiram nodded sympathetically. Mrs. Abernathy runs the boarding house. She lost a child last winter, been in a dark place since then. Having young ones around might do her good. As they made their way to the boarding house, Sam kept close to Nora, aware of the curious stares from the settlers. Riverford was the kind of place where strangers were rare and the subject of intense speculation. Mrs. Abernathy, a thin woman with prematurely gray hair, emerged from the boarding house at their approach. Her severe expression softened at the sight of the twins. Orphans, are they? She asked, her voice gentler than her appearance suggested. Yes, Nora answered. My sister's children. I'm taking them to our aunt in Silver Springs. Mrs. Abernathy nodded decisively. You'll stay here until you're rested, no charge. That's very kind, but I insist, the older woman interrupted. These little ones need proper care and you look about ready to collapse. She turned to Sam. The doctor's at the general store tending to Elijah Parker's broken arm. You can take your prisoner there. With surprising efficiency, Mrs. Abernathy ushered Nora and the twins inside, leaving Sam standing in the street with Jed. The sheriff felt an unexpected reluctance to part from Nora, but duty called. He led his prisoner toward the general store, where a small crowd had gathered to watch the doctor set Elijah's arm. Dr. James Holloway was a competent man in his 50s, with spectacles perched on his nose and hands that moved with practiced precision. He finished with Elijah, then turned his attention to Jed's infected wound, cleaning and bandaging it while Sam stood guard. He needs rest and clean bandages for at least a week, the doctor advised Sam. Moving him before then risks the infection worsening. Sam frowned. I was planning to return to Whispering Creek tomorrow. Then you'll be taking a corpse with you, Dr. Holloway replied bluntly. That wound needs proper care. The news presented Sam with a dilemma. His duty required returning the prisoner to Whispering Creek for trial, but he couldn't risk Jed's life by forcing him to travel. And then there was Nora and the twins. The thought of leaving them to continue their journey alone troubled him more than he cared to admit. Hiram offered a solution. We can keep your prisoner here. Blacksmith has a storage room with a solid door. We can guard him until he's fit to travel. And the woman and children? Sam asked, trying to sound casual. Like Mrs. Abernathy said, they can stay at the boarding house. But Silver Springs is a fair journey from here. Not one I'd recommend for a woman alone with 2 newborns. Sam nodded, his decision forming. I'll escort them to Silver Springs myself, then return for the prisoner. Hiram's eyebrows rose slightly. That's mighty considerate for a lawman with duties elsewhere. It's the right thing to do, Sam replied simply, though he knew there was more to it than that. Something about Nora Patterson and those twins had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't quite explain. With arrangements made for Jed's confinement and treatment, Sam made his way to the boarding house. He found Nora in a small but clean room, sitting in a rocking chair with both twins asleep in a borrowed cradle beside her. The transformation was remarkable. She'd bathed and changed into a fresh dress provided by Mrs. Abernathy, and her honey blonde hair was neatly braided, revealing more fully the fine features of her face. You look rested, Sam observed from the doorway. Nora smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes for the first time since they'd met. Mrs. Abernathy has been wonderful. She found goat's milk for the twins and proper clothes, and even insisted I take a bath while she watched them. The doctor says Jed needs to stay here until his infection clears. I'm sorry to hear that. Will you be staying as well? Sam hesitated. I was thinking I might escort you to Silver Springs. It's a difficult journey, especially with the twins. Surprise flickered across Nora's face. That's very kind, but I couldn't ask you to delay your duties further. You didn't ask. I offered, Sam said, echoing his words from the night before. Besides, the town council won't mind if I'm a few days late returning, especially if I bring back a horse thief. Nora studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you. I would feel safer traveling with you. Something in her simple acknowledgement warmed Sam more than it should have. "We'll leave when you and the twins are ready. 2 days, perhaps?" "2 days sounds perfect," she agreed. As Sam turned to leave, Hannah began to stir in the cradle, her tiny face scrunching up. Before she could cry in earnest, Nora lifted her gently, cradling her close. "Shh, little one," she murmured, beginning to rock. Almost instinctively, she started to sing the same lullaby from the previous night, her voice soft and soothing. Sam stood transfixed in the doorway, watching as Hannah's protests subsided and she drifted back to sleep, soothed by her aunt's gentle voice. In that moment, observing the tender scene, Sam realized he was in danger of developing feelings for this woman, feelings he'd sworn never to allow himself after Elizabeth's death. Yet as Nora's voice filled the small room, wrapping around him like a physical presence, Sam found himself unwilling to fight the sensation. Instead, he quietly closed the door, leaving Nora to her lullaby while carrying the memory of her voice with him. The 2 days in Riverford stretched into 4 as one of the twins, Henry, developed a slight fever that had Dr. Holloway concerned. Those days established a pattern that felt surprisingly natural to Sam. He spent his mornings checking on Jed and helping around the settlement, earning his keep by repairing fences damaged in the storm and assisting the blacksmith with tasks that required an extra pair of strong hands. His afternoons and evenings, however, belonged increasingly to Nora and the twins. At first, he told himself he was simply fulfilling his duty, ensuring their welfare before the journey to Silver Springs. But as the days passed, he found himself inventing reasons to visit the boarding house, bringing small gifts of wild berries he'd found, or simply offering to hold one of the babies while Nora tended to the other. For her part, Nora seemed to welcome his presence. She shared stories of her childhood in Ohio, her family's journey west following the war, and her life with her sister in Copper Canyon. Sam found himself responding in kind, revealing details of his own past. He rarely discussed his father's death in a cattle drive accident, his brief career as a Union soldier despite his youth, his decision to become a lawman after witnessing the chaos of the early frontier days. On the evening of the 4th day, with Henry's fever broken and both twins thriving on the goat's milk Mrs. Abernathy provided, Sam and Nora sat on the boarding house porch. The twins slept peacefully inside, giving Nora a rare moment of respite. "Doctor Holloway says we can leave tomorrow," Nora said, her hands folded in her lap. "He thinks the twins are strong enough for the journey now." Sam nodded, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and gold. "I've arranged for a wagon. It'll be more comfortable than horseback, especially for the little ones." "You've been so kind," Nora murmured. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks," Sam replied. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Nora shook her head gently. "Not anyone. You're a good man, Samuel Yates." The simple compliment affected him more deeply than it should have. He cleared his throat. "I should check on the wagon, make sure everything's ready for tomorrow." As he stood to leave, Nora caught his hand, her touch light but insistent. Will you come back later? The twins seem to settle better when you're around." Sam knew it wasn't true. The twins responded primarily to Nora's voice, her touch, her presence. But he nodded anyway, unable to deny her request or his own desire to spend more time in her company. "I'll be back," he promised. True to his word, Sam returned after nightfall. He found Nora in her room, attempting to soothe both crying infants simultaneously. The peaceful sleepers of the afternoon were gone, replaced by red-faced, squalling bundles that seemed impossible to pacify. "They've been like this for hours," Nora said, her voice strained with fatigue. "I've fed them, changed them, rocked them. Nothing works." Without hesitation, Sam stepped forward and took Hannah from her arms. "Sometimes they just need to cry it out," he said, gently bouncing the baby girl. "My mother used to say babies come into the world knowing only how to feel, not how to understand their feelings." Nora managed a tired smile. "Your mother sounds wise." She was, Sam agreed, a hint of sadness coloring his words. They paced the small room together, each with a baby in arms, speaking softly to the infants and to each other. Gradually, the twins' cries diminished to hiccups and whimpers, but true sleep seemed determined to elude them. "Maybe they sense we're leaving tomorrow," Nora suggested, her voice rough with exhaustion. "Maybe they know everything's about to change again." Sam watched her face in the lamplight, noting the shadows beneath her eyes and the slight tremble in her hands. "Sing to them," he suggested quietly. "Like you did in the cabin." Nora hesitated, then began to sing the same lullaby at first, then another, her voice growing in confidence as the twins responded, their tiny bodies relaxing in degrees. Sam found himself humming along to a tune he recognized, and before long they were singing together, their voices blending in the quiet room. It was an unexpectedly intimate moment, two virtual strangers finding harmony not just in music, but in the shared care of these helpless infants. As the twins finally drifted to sleep, Sam and Nora continued to rock them gently, their eyes meeting over the babies' heads. "You have a fine voice, Sheriff," Nora whispered. "Not as fine as yours," he replied, his own voice hushed. Carefully, they laid the sleeping infants in their cradle, their movements synchronized as though they'd been caring for children together for years instead of days. When the twins were settled, Sam and Nora stood side by side, watching the steady rise and fall of the babies' chests. "We should get some rest ourselves," Sam said reluctantly. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Nora nodded, but neither of them moved. In the quiet of the room, with only the soft breathing of the twins and the distant sounds of the settlement as accompaniment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of connection that had formed rapidly, yet felt somehow timeless. "Sam," Nora said softly, using his given name for the first time. "Thank you, not just for your help, but for—" She gestured toward the sleeping twins. For making me feel less alone." Before Sam could respond, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, then stepped back, her cheeks flushing. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night, Nora," Sam replied, his voice rougher than he intended. He left the room feeling as though something fundamental had shifted within him, as though the careful walls he'd built around his heart had developed a breach that grew larger by the hour. Dawn brought clear skies and the promise of favorable travel conditions. The wagon Sam had arranged was simple but sturdy, with a canvas cover to protect the occupants from sun and weather. Mrs. Abernathy had provided a small mattress for the twins to lie on, along with additional blankets and supplies for the journey. The entire settlement seemed to have gathered to see them off. Dr. Holloway gave final instructions for the care of the twins, while Mrs. Abernathy pressed a bundle of food into Nora's hands. Even Jed, under guard and still limping from his wound, had been brought out to bid them farewell. "Safe travels, Sheriff," the outlaw called as Sam loaded the last of their supplies. "Don't forget to come back for me." "I won't forget," Sam assured him, though the prospect of returning to claim his prisoner seemed increasingly like an unwelcome interruption to whatever might develop between himself and Nora. As they prepared to depart, Mrs. Abernathy drew Nora into a fierce embrace. "You're doing right by those babies," the older woman said firmly. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Nora nodded, touched by the woman's unexpected support. "Thank you for everything." With final goodbyes exchanged, Sam helped Nora into the wagon, where she settled herself with the twins nestled in a basket beside her. He took the reins, clicked his tongue to the horses, and they began their journey to Silver Springs, a 3-day trek through terrain that ranged from open prairie to forested foothills. The first day passed uneventfully. The twins, perhaps soothed by the steady motion of the wagon, slept more than they had in Riverford. When they woke, Nora tended to them with increasing confidence, her movements becoming more assured with each feeding and changing. Sam found himself watching her often, admiring her resilience and the gentle way she handled the infants despite her own fatigue. She had a natural grace that made even the most mundane tasks seem somehow special. They made camp that evening in a protected hollow near a small stream. While Nora fed the twins, Sam built a fire and prepared a simple meal from their provisions. The domesticity of the scene, the crackling fire, the shared meal, the quiet conversation as night descended created an illusion of permanence that Sam found himself reluctant to dispel. "Tell me about Silver Springs," he said as they sat side by side near the fire, the twins finally asleep in their basket. "What's your aunt like?" Nora's expression grew thoughtful. "Aunt Harriet is my father's sister. She's formidable. Widowed young like my mother, but she never remarried. Runs a millinery shop in town." She hesitated. "I haven't actually seen her in 5 years, but we've corresponded. When Margaret died, she was the only family I had left to turn to. And she agreed to take in you and the twins." "She said there was room in her home and work in her shop," Nora replied. "It was more than anyone else offered." Sam nodded, understanding the limited options available to a single woman with 2 infants in her care. "Silver Springs is a good town, growing fast but still decent. You'll be safe there." "Will you stay?" Nora asked, the question emerging before she could reconsider it. "Just for a day or two, I mean, to rest before you return to Riverford." The invitation hung between them, laden with possibilities neither was ready to articulate. Sam looked into the fire, watching the flames dance and spark. "I'd like that," he said finally. "If your aunt doesn't object to housing a dusty lawman alongside her new charges." Nora smiled, relief evident in her expression. "I think she'll make an exception for the man who helped save her grandniece and grandnephew." The conversation shifted to lighter topics: childhood memories, favorite books, dreams deferred by circumstance. As the fire burned down to embers, Sam found himself sharing things he'd told no one since Elizabeth's death: his hopes of someday owning land of his own, perhaps raising horses instead of chasing outlaws. "Why haven't you?" Nora asked. "Settled down, I mean." Sam's expression grew distant. "I was engaged once, Elizabeth Baker. She took sick the winter before our wedding. Consumption." The old pain surfaced briefly in his eyes. After that, it seemed easier to focus on the job, safer. Nora reached out, covering his hand with hers. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago," Sam said, though they both knew some wounds never fully healed. They sat in companionable silence, their hands still touching, until Nora stifled a yawn. "I should sleep while they're sleeping," she said reluctantly. "Morning comes early with twins." Sam helped her arrange a comfortable sleeping space in the wagon, then returned to his place by the fire, taking the first watch. As he stared into the dying embers, he allowed himself to imagine a different life, one where evenings like this were commonplace, where Nora's voice singing lullabies was the last sound he heard before sleep, where the twins grew from infants to children under his watchful eye. It was a dangerous fantasy for a man who'd sworn off such dreams. Yet as the night deepened around him, Sam found himself unable to banish the images or the unexpected hope they carried. The second day of their journey brought new challenges. The terrain became rougher as they entered the foothills, forcing them to travel more slowly. By midday, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising another storm. "We should find shelter," Sam said, scanning the landscape. "That ridge ahead might have some caves or at least an overhang we can use." Nora nodded, cradling Hannah, who had been fussy all morning. "Henry's sleeping, at least. I'd hate to wake him with rain." They reached the ridge just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Fortune favored them. A shallow cave, more of a deep indentation in the rock face, provided enough shelter for the wagon and horses. Sam worked quickly to secure their camp, building a small fire near the mouth of the cave where the smoke could escape. "It's not much," he apologized, helping Nora down from the wagon with Hannah in her arms, "but it'll keep us dry." "After sleeping rough with newborns, this feels like a palace," Nora replied with a smile that warmed Sam more than the fire. The storm intensified, sheets of rain obscuring the view beyond the cave entrance. Inside, the small fire created a sphere of warmth and light. Nora fed and changed both twins, then settled them in their basket. To everyone's surprise, they fell asleep almost immediately, perhaps lulled by the steady drumming of the rain. "Reminds me of our first night," Sam observed, keeping his voice low. "The cabin, the storm." "Except this time we don't have an outlaw for company," Nora replied with a hint of mischief. "And the twins aren't crying," Sam added. "That's a significant improvement." They shared a quiet laugh, conscious of the sleeping infants. Sitting side by side on a spread blanket, they watched the rain while sharing the bread and cheese Mrs. Abernathy had packed for them. There was an easy comfort between them now, the kind that usually took months or years to develop. "Do you ever think about leaving Whispering Creek?" Nora asked, breaking a comfortable silence. Finding somewhere new to start over, Sam considered the question. "Sometimes." "The territory's changing. More settlers coming in, more towns sprouting up, less need for men like me." "Men like you will always be needed," Nora said softly. "Good men, kind men, men who stop to help a woman with crying twins in the middle of nowhere." Her words caused a flush of warmth to spread through Sam's chest. "That's generous of you to say." "It's the truth," Nora insisted. She hesitated, then continued in a rush. "My aunt's letter mentioned that Silver Springs has no sheriff. The town council's been looking to hire someone with experience." The implication hung in the air between them. Sam studied her face in the flickering firelight, trying to read the emotions behind her carefully casual suggestion. "Are you proposing I apply for the position?" he asked. Nora's cheeks colored slightly. "I'm merely sharing information that might be of interest, professionally speaking." "Professionally speaking," Sam echoed, a smile tugging at his lips. "And what about personally speaking?" The question crossed a boundary they had both been carefully avoiding. Nora looked down at her hands, then back up at Sam, her expression vulnerable yet determined. "Personally speaking," she said quietly, "I've come to value your company these past days, more than I expected to, more than might be wise given our circumstances." Sam reached out, covering her hand with his. "Wisdom isn't always right. Sometimes the heart knows better." "Does yours?" Nora asked, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Know better, I mean." Instead of answering with words, Sam leaned forward and kissed her gently, tentatively, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Nora didn't pull away. Instead, she responded with a tenderness that spoke of longing held in check for too long. When they finally parted, Sam kept her hand in his. "I can't make promises," he said honestly. "Not yet, but I'd like to see what might be possible in Silver Springs if they'll have me." Nora's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "I think they might be persuaded." A soft cry from the twins' basket interrupted the moment. Hannah was awake, her tiny face scrunched in discomfort. Nora moved to pick her up, checking her diaper and finding it dry. "She might be hungry again," Sam suggested. Nora nodded, preparing to feed her, but Hannah's cries only intensified, waking Henry, who joined his sister in protest. Soon both twins were wailing, their combined voices echoing in the confined space of the cave. "SHH, little ones," Nora soothed, attempting to rock both of them at once. "It's just the storm, you're safe." But the twins were inconsolable, their cries growing more desperate by the minute. Nora looked at Sam with helpless frustration. "May I?" he asked, holding out his arms. Nora handed Henry to him, and Sam cradled the baby boy against his chest, his large hand supporting the tiny head with surprising gentleness. He began to hum, a low, soothing sound that blended with the patter of rain. After a moment, Nora joined in, her clear voice rising above Sam's deeper tones. Together, they sang to the twins lullabies at first, then folk songs Sam remembered from his childhood, then hymns Nora had learned in church. Gradually, miraculously, the baby's cries subsided, their tiny bodies relaxing as the music wrapped around them like a blanket. By the time the storm began to abate, both twins were asleep again, their faces peaceful in the flickering firelight. Sam and Nora continued to hold them, reluctant to disturb their hard-won slumber. "Your voice," Sam said softly, "it's like magic to them." "Our voices," Nora corrected him. "They respond to both of us now." The simple observation carried profound implications, a recognition that in the space of less than a week, they had become something like a family to these orphaned infants, and perhaps to each other as well. As night fell, with the rain reduced to a gentle patter, Sam and Nora created a nest of blankets near the fire. They laid the sleeping twins between them, forming a protective circle of warmth and care. Though they touched only occasionally a brush of fingers, the press of shoulders, there was an intimacy to their arrangement that spoke of trust and growing affection. "If I do come to Silver Springs," Sam said as they settled for the night, "it wouldn't be right away. I'd need to return Jed to Whispering Creek, tender my resignation, settle my affairs." "I understand," Nora replied. "The twins and I will be there, getting acquainted with Aunt Harriet, waiting." The word waiting hung in the air, a promise neither of them had expected to make but both now embraced. Sam reached across the sleeping infants to take Nora's hand. "I've been wandering a long time," he admitted. "Never thought I'd find a reason to stop." "And now?" Nora asked. "Now I'm thinking some journeys are worth ending if the destination is right." Sam squeezed her hand gently. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we reach Silver Springs." As Nora drifted toward sleep, her hand still in his, Sam kept watch, his thoughts no longer fixed on the past but turning increasingly toward the future, a future that, for the first time in years, held the promise of home. The final day of their journey dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean overnight. They set out early, both eager to reach Silver Springs before nightfall. The twins, perhaps sensing the end of their travels, were unusually content, sleeping for long stretches in their basket and waking only for feedings. As they traveled, the landscape gradually changed from rugged foothills to more settled country. Occasional farms and homesteads appeared, then more frequent signs of civilization, fenced fields, roads with actual wagon tracks, a small schoolhouse standing alone at a crossroads. "We're close now," Sam said as they crested a rise in early afternoon. "Silver Springs should be just beyond that next ridge." Nora nodded, her expression a mix of anticipation and apprehension. "I wonder if Aunt Harriet received my letter. I sent it from Copper Canyon before we left, but there's no knowing if it arrived." "We'll manage either way," Sam assured her. "If need be, there's bound to be a hotel in town where you can stay until things are settled with your aunt." The "we" in his statement went unremarked upon, though both noted it another small step toward whatever future they might build together. Silver Springs came into view as the sun began its westward descent, a proper town with several streets radiating from a central square, substantial buildings of wood and brick, and a general air of prosperity that spoke of the silver mines that gave the settlement its name and purpose. "It's bigger than I expected," Nora observed as they approached the outskirts. "Margaret described it as a small town when she passed through 3 years ago." "Silver strikes change places fast," Sam replied. "Boomtowns grow overnight when the ore is rich enough." His experienced eye noted the mix of businesses, not just saloons and gambling halls, but proper shops, a church with a small steeple, what appeared to be a school building, and various other establishments that suggested permanence rather than the transient nature of many mining communities. "Do you know where your aunt lives?" he asked as they entered the town proper, drawing curious glances from pedestrians. "Her shop is on the main street," Nora replied, scanning the buildings they passed. "The letter said she lives above it," she pointed suddenly. "There. Harriet's Millinery and Fine Goods." The shop was a tidy establishment with a display window featuring several fashionable ladies' hats. Sam guided the wagon to a halt before it, then helped Nora down, lifting the basket with the sleeping twins carefully. "Would you like me to wait here?" he asked, suddenly uncertain of his place in this reunion. Nora shook her head firmly. "No, please come with me. After everything, I'd like you to meet her." Together, they entered the shop, a small bell announcing their arrival. The interior was neat and well-appointed, with hats and bonnets displayed on stands, and shelves holding ribbons, feathers, and other decorative items. From a back room, a voice called, "Just a moment." The woman who emerged was tall and straight-backed, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a severe bun. Her features, though lined with age, showed the same fine bone structure as Nora's, and her eyes, a striking hazel, widened with recognition. "Nora?" she asked, her composed demeanor slipping momentarily. "Good heavens, child, your letter only arrived yesterday. I wasn't expecting you so soon." "Aunt Harriet," Nora stepped forward, her relief evident. "I'm so glad you're here. We've had quite a journey." Harriet's gaze shifted to the basket and its precious contents, then to Sam, standing respectfully behind Nora. "So I see," she remarked, her composure returning. "And these must be Margaret's twins and your companion." "Sheriff Samuel Yates of Whispering Creek," Sam introduced himself, removing his hat. "I escorted Miss Patterson and the infants for the final leg of their journey. The trail can be dangerous for a woman traveling alone." Harriet's assessment of him was thorough and unabashed. "Indeed," she said finally. "Well, you have my thanks for seeing my niece safely to her destination." She turned back to Nora. "Come upstairs, child. You look exhausted, and those babies need proper accommodations." With brisk efficiency, Harriet closed the shop, hanging a "Closed for Family Matters" sign in the window. She led them through a back door and up a narrow staircase to her living quarters, a surprisingly spacious apartment with several rooms, comfortably if plainly furnished. "The spare bedroom is through there," she indicated a door off the main living area. "It's small, but it should accommodate you and the twins. As for the sheriff, I'll find lodging at the hotel," Sam said quickly. "I wouldn't want to impose." Harriet studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "A sensible arrangement, though you're welcome to take supper with us this evening, Sheriff, as thanks for your assistance." "I'd be honored, madam." While Harriet helped Nora settle the twins in the bedroom, Sam brought up their few possessions from the wagon. By the time he returned from stabling the horses at the livery, Nora had washed away the dust of travel and changed into a fresh dress borrowed from her aunt. The transformation reminded Sam of their first evening in Riverford, the way proper rest and care revealed the true beauty that hardship had temporarily obscured. Supper was a simple but substantial meal: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread from the town bakery. As they ate, Nora related the events that had brought her to Silver Springs, from Margaret's death to their meeting with Sam during the storm. She spoke warmly of his assistance, though Sam noted she carefully avoided mentioning the growing attachment between them. Harriet listened attentively, asking occasional questions but mostly allowing Nora to tell her story uninterrupted. When the tale was complete, she sat back in her chair, regarding them both thoughtfully. "Life has a way of presenting unexpected paths," she observed. "When I invited you to join me, Nora, I never imagined you'd arrive with 2 infants and a sheriff in tow." "I'm sorry if it's an inconvenience," Nora began, but Harriet waved away her concern. "Nonsense. This apartment has been too quiet since Edmund passed. Perhaps some young life is exactly what it needs." She turned her attention to Sam. "And what of you, Sheriff? Will you be returning to Whispering Creek immediately?" Sam glanced at Nora before responding. "I have a prisoner waiting in Riverford who needs to stand trial, but after that." He hesitated. "I understand Silver Springs might be in need of a sheriff." Harriet's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed. Our last one left for the gold fields in Dakota Territory 3 months ago. The town council has been making do with deputies, but it's not an ideal arrangement." Her perceptive gaze shifted between Sam and her niece. "Am I to understand you're considering applying for the position, if the town would have me?" Sam replied. "I've served as sheriff in Whispering Creek for 7 years. Before that, I was a deputy in Denver." Impressive credentials, Harriet acknowledged, though I wonder what prompted this sudden interest in our little community. The question hung in the air, its implication clear. Sam met her gaze steadily. Let's just say I've recently been reminded that there's more to life than simply doing a job. Sometimes a man needs roots, a purpose beyond the badge. Harriet's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Well said, Sheriff. She rose from the table. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should check on those twins before they wake the entire building with their hunger. When she had left the room, Sam and Nora exchanged glances, a silent communication that spoke volumes. She likes you, Nora whispered. She's just not one to show it easily. Reminds me of someone else I know, Sam replied with a smile, remembering Nora's initial reserve when they'd first met. Before Nora could respond, a cry came from the bedroom, followed quickly by a second, more insistent wail. The twins were awake and demanding attention. Duty calls, Nora sighed, rising from her chair. Will you? I'll help, Sam said without hesitation, following her to the bedroom. They found Harriet already there, attempting to soothe Hannah while Henry continued to cry in the makeshift crib, a large drawer padded with blankets that served as a temporary bed for the twins. They're hungry, Harriet diagnosed, handing Hannah to Nora. And this one needs changing. For the next hour, the three adults worked together to feed, change, and comfort the twins. Harriet proved surprisingly adept with the infants, her stern demeanor giving way to gentle efficiency as she handled their needs. I raised 3 younger siblings after our mother died, she explained when Sam commented on her skill. Then helped with my brother's children, including Nora and Margaret, when his wife passed. Life has a way of teaching us what we need to know. Despite their best efforts, the twins remained fussy, overtired from the journey and unsettled by their new surroundings. As the evening deepened into night, their cries grew more persistent, echoing in the small apartment. Perhaps some fresh air would help, Harriet suggested, looking increasingly concerned as both babies worked themselves into a state of distress. There's a small courtyard behind the shop. Sometimes a change of scene can work wonders. Nora, who had been pacing with Henry, nodded gratefully. We could try. Nothing else seems to be working. Sam helped gather blankets and the basket, and the unusual procession made their way downstairs and out to the courtyard, a small enclosed space with a few potted plants and a stone bench beside a fire pit used for outdoor cooking in summer. I'll build a small fire, Sam offered, noting the coolness of the evening air. It might help warm them. While he gathered kindling and wood from the small stack beside the back door, Nora continued to walk with the twins, murmuring soothing words that had little effect on their crying. Harriet watched with growing concern. They're exhausted but fighting sleep, she observed. It happens sometimes with little ones. They get so overtired they can't settle. Sam had the fire burning brightly within minutes, creating a circle of warmth in the small courtyard. Nora brought the twins closer, hoping the gentle heat would comfort them, but still they cried great hiccuping sobs that seemed too powerful for such tiny beings. Try singing, Sam suggested quietly, remembering how effective Nora's voice had been in the cave and at the cabin. Like before. Nora hesitated, glancing at her aunt. I don't want to disturb the neighbors. Sing, Harriet encouraged her, settling on the bench. The courtyard walls will keep the sound contained, and even if a neighbor hears, I suspect they'd prefer singing to crying. With a small nod, Nora began to sing softly at first, then with growing confidence as the twins began to respond, their cries diminishing as her voice rose in the familiar lullaby. Sam joined in after a moment, his deeper tones providing a harmony that seemed to further soothe the infants. Harriet watched in amazement as the previously inconsolable twins gradually quieted, their tiny bodies relaxing in Nora's arms. Remarkable, she murmured. Simply remarkable. As the twins finally drifted toward sleep, Nora continued to sing, moving to sit beside the fire. The flickering light cast a golden glow on her face, highlighting the tenderness in her expression as she gazed down at the babies. Sam, seated nearby, felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him, a certainty that this woman, these children, were meant to be part of his life. When the song ended, the courtyard fell silent except for the crackling of the fire and the soft, regular breathing of the sleeping twins. Nora looked up, meeting Sam's gaze across the flames, a smile of shared triumph curving her lips. "Well," Harriet said after a moment, her voice unusually gentle, "I believe I'll retire for the evening. Nora, you and the twins should stay out here a while longer until they're deeply asleep. We don't want to risk waking them by moving them too soon." She rose from the bench. "Sheriff, perhaps you'd be kind enough to remain with my niece. For propriety's sake, you understand, I'll leave the back door unlatched." With that remarkably transparent excuse, Harriet left them alone in the courtyard, the sleeping twins creating both a chaperone and a bond between them that went deeper than convention. "Your aunt," Sam said when the door had closed behind her, "is a very perceptive woman." "She always has been," Nora replied with a soft laugh. "It used to drive Margaret and me to distraction when we were girls. We could never get away with anything." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire and the peaceful faces of the twins. Finally, Sam spoke the words that had been forming in his mind throughout the evening. "I'll come back," he said simply. "After I've settled matters in Whispering Creek, whether or not Silver Springs offers me the sheriff's position." Nora looked up, her expression hopeful yet cautious. "You're certain it's a big decision, changing your life for people you've only just met?" "Some people you know your whole life and never really connect with," Sam replied. "Others." He gestured to the sleeping twins, to the space between himself and Nora. "Sometimes it doesn't take long to know what matters." Nora's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "How long will you be gone?" 2 weeks, 3 at most." Sam leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'll understand if you have doubts, if you change your mind while I'm away." "But I hope—" "I won't change my mind," Nora interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "We'll be here, all 3 of us, waiting." The simple promise hung in the air between them, as tangible as the warmth from the fire. Sam reached out, taking her free hand in his. With her other arm, Nora cradled the sleeping twins, creating a circle that felt, even in its newness, like the foundation of something permanent. "Then I'd better get started," Sam said, reluctant to leave yet eager to begin the journey that would bring him back to her. "The sooner I go, the sooner I return." As if sensing the significance of the moment, Hannah stirred slightly in her sleep, her tiny hand finding her brother's. Even in slumber, the twins sought connection, a reminder of the bonds that formed the basis of family, whether created by blood or by choice. Sam rose, knowing it was time to take his leave, yet finding it harder than he'd expected. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the sleeping infants. At Nora's nod, he leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on each tiny forehead. Then, straightening, he cupped Nora's face in his hand, his touch reverent. "Take care of them and yourself." "We'll be fine," she assured him. "Aunt Harriet is already smitten with the twins, though she'd never admit it, and I'm stronger than I look." "That," Sam said with a smile, "I already knew." Their parting kiss was brief but laden with promise, not a goodbye but a pledge of return. As Sam stepped back, Nora's voice followed him, soft in the firelight. "We'll sing for you every evening, so you'll know we're thinking of you." The image stayed with him as he walked to the Hotel Nora by the fire, the twins sleeping peacefully in her arms, her voice rising in the night like a beacon calling him home. The following 3 weeks were a time of transition for both Sam and Nora. While Sam returned to Riverford to collect his prisoner, then made the journey to Whispering Creek to tender his resignation and settle his affairs, Nora established a new routine with the twins in Silver Springs. Aunt Harriet proved to be an unexpected ally. Though stern in her manner, she quickly developed a genuine affection for the infants, often volunteering to watch them while Nora helped in the millinery shop. Together, The women converted a small storage room adjacent to Nora's bedroom into a proper nursery, complete with a second-hand cradle large enough to hold both twins. The town itself welcomed Nora, and the twins with the generous spirit often found in frontier communities. Neighbors brought small gifts, hand-sewn gowns, a rocking chair, preserves, and baked goods. The doctor, a kindly man in his 60s, made a courtesy call to examine the infants, pronouncing them fine specimens with healthy lungs, a fact the entire building could attest to during their nightly crying spells. Those crying spells remained a challenge. Despite the growing comfort of their new surroundings, the twins continued to be fussy in the evenings, often crying inconsolably until Nora sang them to sleep beside the fire in the courtyard. It became a nightly ritual, one that Nora maintained as much for herself as for the twins, knowing that somewhere on the trail, Sam might be thinking of them at that same moment. For his part, Sam completed his duties in Whispering Creek with a mix of efficiency and impatience. Jed Tucker was sentenced to 6 months in the territorial prison, for horse theft, a relatively light sentence given his cooperation, and the judge's consideration of his infected leg, which continued to trouble him. The town council accepted Sam's resignation with reluctance, offering him an increase in salary to stay, but Sam's mind was made up. "There's a position in Silver Springs," he explained to his deputy, a capable young man named Thomas who would likely be appointed as his replacement. "And other considerations that make the move right for me at this time." Thomas, who had worked alongside Sam for 5 years, studied his face. "Wouldn't have anything to do with that woman and the babies you escorted there, would it?" Sam's expression gave him away. Thomas laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "About time, Sheriff. Never figured you for the family type, but I reckon some women can change a man's mind about such things." The other considerations extended beyond Nora and the twins. Sam had written ahead to the Silver Springs Town Council, inquiring about the sheriff's position. Their response had been enthusiastic. His reputation had preceded him, and they were eager to have a lawman of his experience take charge of their growing community. The salary they offered was generous, reflecting the prosperity brought by the silver mines and the town's desire for stability and order. 3 weeks after leaving Silver Springs, Sam returned not as a visitor, but as the town's new sheriff, his few possessions packed in saddlebags, his future open before him like an unwritten page. He arrived in early evening as the shops along the main street were closing for the day. Harriet's Millinery was among them, the proprietress herself placing the closed sign in the window as Sam dismounted before the shop. "Sheriff Yates," Harriet greeted him, her tone more welcoming than he remembered. "Or should I say our new sheriff?" The town council was quite pleased with their acquisition. "Madam," Sam nodded, removing his hat, "it's good to be back. How are?" He hesitated, suddenly uncertain of his place, of how to ask after those who had occupied his thoughts throughout his absence. Harriet's expression softened, a rare occurrence that suggested she understood more than she let on. "They're in the courtyard. It's become something of a routine. The twins fuss. Nora takes them outside by the fire and sings until they sleep." She unlocked the shop door. "Go on through. She'll be glad of the company, even happier that it's yours." Sam thanked her, then made his way through the familiar path to the back courtyard. As he approached, he heard Nora's voice, that sweet, clear sound that had haunted his dreams for 3 weeks. She was singing a lullaby he didn't recognize, something about angels watching over sleeping children. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Nora sat on a blanket spread before a small fire, the twins cradled in her arms. They were already asleep, their tiny faces peaceful in the firelight. Nora continued to sing, her gaze fixed on the flames, unaware of his presence. In that moment, Sam knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right decision. This woman, these children, they were his future, his home, his purpose beyond the badge. The realization was both humbling and exhilarating. "That's a mighty pretty song," he said softly when she paused for breath. Nora's head snapped up, her eyes widening in recognition. "Sam," she exclaimed, then immediately lowered her voice, glancing at the sleeping infants. "You're here. You're really here." "I said I'd come back," he reminded her, stepping into the courtyard. "Sorry it took longer than expected. There was more to settle in Whispering Creek than I anticipated." "But you're here now," Nora said, her smile radiant in the firelight. "For good." Sam nodded, moving to sit beside her on the blanket. "For good. The town council offered me the position. I start officially tomorrow." He glanced down at the sleeping twins. "They've grown." "Babies do that," Nora laughed softly. "Henry's almost outgrown his gowns and Hannah has discovered her voice. She coos constantly during the day as if practicing for her evening concerts." Sam reached out, gently touching Hannah's cheek with one finger. "She gets that from her aunt," he murmured. "The singing, I mean." "I've sung to them every night, just like I promised," Nora told him. "Sometimes Aunt Harriet joins in. She has a lovely alto voice, though she claims it's been years since she used it." "And do they still cry through the night?" "Less than before," Nora admitted. "But they still have their moments. The doctor says it's normal for twins. They feel everything more intensely, including each other's distress." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the twins sleep and the fire dance. Finally, Sam reached for Nora's hand, entwining their fingers. "I thought about you every day," he said simply. "About all three of you." "We thought about you too," Nora replied. "Or at least I did. I can't speak for the twins, but they did seem to miss your bass harmony during their lullabies." Sam chuckled, the sound warm in the quiet courtyard. "Well, I'm here now, ready to resume my role in the nightly concerts." Nora's expression grew more serious. "It's not just the singing, Sam, it's everything. Having you here feels right in a way I hadn't expected, like finding a piece of a puzzle you didn't know was missing." The sentiment mirrored Sam's own feelings so perfectly that for a moment, he couldn't respond. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed her, not the brief, promising kiss of their parting, but a deeper expression of the connection that had grown between them, even in absence. "Nora Patterson," he said when they finally separated, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it's sudden. I know we've only known each other a short time, but these past weeks, being away from you and the twins, made one thing very clear to me." He took both her hands in his. "I love you. All three of you, and if you'll have me, I'd like to spend my life proving that every day." Tears welled in Nora's eyes, catching the firelight like diamonds. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Sheriff Yates?" "I'm asking if you'll marry me," Sam confirmed, his heart pounding as though he'd run for miles. "If you'll let me be a father to these little ones, if you'll build a life with me right here in Silver Springs." Nora's answer was in her eyes before it reached her lips. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." As if to seal the agreement, Hannah stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand reaching out to grasp Sam's finger. Henry, not to be outdone, chose that moment to open his eyes, regarding Sam with solemn curiosity before breaking into a toothless smile. "Well, I guess that's settled then," Sam laughed softly, his heart fuller than he'd ever imagined possible. "The jury has spoken." The weeks that followed passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sam took up his duties as sheriff, quickly earning the respect of the townspeople with his fair-minded approach to law enforcement. Nora divided her time between helping in Harriet's shop and caring for the twins, whose personalities emerged more distinctly each day. Henry proved to be the more serious of the two, observant and thoughtful even as an infant. Hannah was the performer, quick to smile and vocalize, capturing hearts with her ready charm. Wedding preparations proceeded at a pace that raised a few eyebrows among the more traditional members of the community. But as Harriet pointed out when the pastor's wife made a delicately phrased inquiry about the hasty nature of the union, these children need a proper family, and Nora and the sheriff have already demonstrated their commitment to each other and to them. Some situations call for efficiency rather than extended courtship. The ceremony itself was simple but heartfelt, held in the town's small church on a bright Saturday morning in late autumn. The twins, now nearly 3 months old, attended in new outfits sewn by Harriet Hannah in a white dress with a tiny lace collar, Henry in a miniature suit that made him look, as Sam remarked, like the smallest banker in the territory. Nora wore a gown of pale blue silk, a wedding gift from Harriet, who had ordered the fabric specially from Denver. Sam, standing at the altar in a new black suit, thought she had never looked more beautiful. "Do you, Samuel James Yates, take Nora Elizabeth Patterson to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The pastor asked, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church. "I do," Sam responded without hesitation, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. "And do you, Nora Elizabeth Patterson, take Samuel James Yates to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Nora replied, her voice steady despite the tears shining in her eyes. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The pastor smiled benevolently. "You may kiss your bride, Sheriff." The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of the audience yet conveying the depth of feeling between them. As they turned to face the congregation, Hannah chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal from Harriet's arms, causing a ripple of laughter to spread through the church. "Even the little ones approve," the pastor chuckled. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Sheriff and Mrs. Yates and their family." The reception that followed was held in the town hall, decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons by the ladies of the church. The entire town seemed to have turned out to celebrate, bringing gifts and well wishes for the newly formed family. The most touching moment came when a group of miners presented them with a handcrafted rocking horse, large enough for both twins to ride when they were older. "Every child needs a proper horse in this territory," the foreman explained with gruff affection. "And these two will need to learn to share, being twins and all." As the celebration continued around them, Sam and Nora found a quiet moment together, watching as the twins were passed from one admiring guest to another, clearly enjoying the attention. "Happy?" Sam asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Nora replied, leaning into his embrace. "A month ago I was alone with 2 newborns, no home, no prospects, and now you're stuck with a grumpy sheriff who snores," Sam teased. "A brave, kind sheriff who stopped to help a woman and 2 crying babies," Nora corrected him. "Who sang them to sleep beside the fire when nothing else would soothe them, who came back for us." Sam's expression grew serious. "I'll always come back for you, all 3 of you, that's a promise." The home they established together combined the apartment above the millinery with the adjacent rooms that had previously been used for storage. Harriet insisted on the arrangement, claiming it gave her privacy while keeping family close enough to be useful. It was a generous fiction. Everyone knew she had grown too attached to the twins to bear having them move far away. Life settled into a rhythm that, while demanding, brought a satisfaction neither Sam nor Nora had expected to find. Sam's duties as sheriff kept him busy during the day, but he made it a point to be home each evening for dinner and the twins' bedtime routine. Nora managed the household and helped in the shop when the twins were napping or when Harriet volunteered to watch them. The twins continued to grow and thrive, reaching milestones that were celebrated as family triumphs the first time Henry rolled over, Hannah's first intentional smile, the day they both slept through the night without crying, a miracle that brought tears of gratitude to Nora's eyes. Their nightly ritual remained special, however. Even when the twins no longer needed it to sleep, Sam and Nora would often bring them to the courtyard in good weather or sit before the hearth fire when it was cold, singing the lullabies that had first brought them together. As the twins grew older, they would join in first with coos and babbles, later with their own attempts at melody. One evening, as winter gave way to spring, Sam returned home to find Nora in the courtyard, the twins asleep in her arms beside the small fire. The scene was so reminiscent of his return to Silver Springs months earlier that he paused in the doorway, struck by how far they had come since that night. "You look mighty peaceful," he observed, joining her on the blanket. They were fussy earlier, Nora explained. Cutting teeth, I think. But the fire and the singing worked their usual magic. She smiled up at him. How was your day, Sheriff? Quiet, thank goodness. Just a minor dispute over a mining claim that was settled without anyone drawing a weapon. Sam gently stroked Hannah's dark hair. And yours? Eventful, Nora replied, a hint of something in her tone that caught Sam's attention. The twins took their first steps today, both of them within minutes of each other, as if they'd planned it. And I missed it, Sam sighed, genuine disappointment in his voice. You'll see it tomorrow, Nora assured him. Now that they've discovered they can do it, I doubt they'll stop. She hesitated, then added casually, and there will be other firsts. Sam caught the subtle emphasis in her words. Other firsts. Nora nodded, her eyes sparkling in the firelight. In about 7 months, if Dr. Andrews is correct. For a moment, Sam stared at her, processing her meaning. Then, as understanding dawned, a slow smile spread across his face. You're certain? As certain as one can be at this stage, Nora confirmed. The doctor says all signs point to a healthy pregnancy, though he did warn me that after twins, any subsequent births might seem almost too easy by comparison. Sam laughed, the sound rich with joy. A baby, our baby. He reached out, laying his hand gently on her still flat abdomen. Boy or girl, it doesn't matter, as long as it has your voice and your heart. And your courage, Nora added softly, your strength. They sat together in the growing darkness, the sleeping twins between them, the promise of new life binding them even closer. Above them, the first stars of evening appeared, bearing witness to a love that had begun in the most unexpected circumstances but had grown into something as enduring as the mountains that surrounded their home. Sing something, Sam requested, his voice husky with emotion. For all of us. And so, as night fell over Silver Springs, Nora's voice rose once more in melody, a lullaby for the sleeping twins, a love song for her husband, a welcome for the new life growing within her. Sam joined in, their voices twining together as they had that first night in the abandoned cabin, when 2 crying infants and a storm had brought them together beside a fire, setting them on a path neither could have foreseen, but both now traveled with gratitude and joy. The twins slept peacefully, their small faces illuminated by firelight, no longer crying through the night, for they had found, as had Sam and Nora, the healing power of family, of belonging, of love that turns strangers into kin and makes a house into a home.